This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you all for attending this afternoon. And if you were on the meeting this morning that we had with the Southwest Florida Seagrass Working Group, thanks for your persistence in sticking with our conversations on some of the bay management issues we're facing. So first of all, I just wanted to say and introduce myself. I'm Ed Sherwood. I'm the Executive Director of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. We are working in partnership with the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute, namely Carrie Lopez, Dr. Sugandha Shankar, on a project that came from a NOAA Actionable Science grant. And this work is hopefully going to be complementary to some of the conversations we've been having as part of the Old Tampa Bay Working Group through the Nitrogen Management Consortium, as well as through research initiatives that we've been participating on as through the Tampa Bay Tampa Bay Estuary Program's Technical Advisory Committee, centered around water quality and seagrass issues in the Old Tampa Bay watershed. So again, this work that we're kicking off with the stakeholder meeting today is very much a co-production model, in a sense that we are going to be asking you all for input on how we move things forward, particularly on two main management actions that we were focused on in development of this grant application. So before we get too far along, we did want to go around the room and just introduce everyone of all the stakeholders that are participating virtually this afternoon. So if you could give a brief intro to yourself and the organization you're representing, that would be helpful to just to familiarize everyone in the room. The way we'll do it through this virtual platform is go through the list of attendees on the GoToMeeting so that we're not talking over one another as we go through the list. So I'll work through it. If I butcher your name, I apologize from the start, but we'll go through and introduce the team that's collaborating on the project first. So I'll ask Carrie Lopez to give an intro. I think you're muted, Carrie.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm Carrie Lopez, and I am with FWRI with the HAB group. I work on Pyridinium, and I'm a co-PI on this project.
Thanks, Carrie. Gary, go ahead.
Hello, Gary Rollerson, ecologist for the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, and I'm on the program team.
Marcus.
Hi, everybody. Marcus Beck, program scientist with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. I'm also on the project team.
Maya.
I'm Maya Burke. I'm the assistant director of the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, here to help with stakeholder engagement.
Al Tilson. You might have to unmute yourself, Al, if you're muted. We'll come back. Alana Todd.
Hi, my name is Alana Todd. I'm the environmental planner at the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council.
See, Al's microphone came back on. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, I'm Al Tilson. I'm just an observer. I'm with the Tampa Bay Sierra Club Surface Water Quality Committee. I guess I should mention I'm sort of a maritime historian, but for a very different region and time. But
thanks, Al. Allison Roberts.
I'm Allison Roberts, president of the Civic Association for Dana Shores. We are a waterfront community in Old Tampa Bay.
Thanks, Allison. Ashley Painter.
Hi, I'm Ashley Painter. I am the sustainability coordinator for the city of Oldsmar.
Bernard Kaiser.
Hi, my name is Bernie Kaiser. I work for Hillsborough County's Conservation and Environmental Land Management Department.
Bill Faring.
I'm Bill Faring. I'm the president of the Friends of Weeden Island, and we are in support of a lot of the west shore of Old Tampa Bay. And we're just an observer at this point.
Hey, Bill. Good to see you. Chip Deutsch.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, I'm a manatee biologist with FWC Fish and Wildlife Research Institute, and I am interested in Tampa Bay issues, but mostly I'm here because we have an actionable science grant from NOAA as well, and so I'm interested in how you engage stakeholders. So we'll be doing something similar. Thank you.
Great, welcome, Chip. Chris Anastasio.
Hey guys, Chris Anastasio, Southwest Florida Water Management District. I'm the Chief Water Quality Scientist and Seagrass Mapping Program lead, and I'm also with the Surface Water Improvement and Management Program, or SWIM program at Swiftman. Good to be here.
Chris Moore.
Hi, my name's Chris. I'm with the United States Geological Survey. I work with Kim Yates, and I'm just here as an observer.
Christine Siriano.
Hi, everybody. I'm a scientist with ESA, and I'm just here listening in today.
Christopher Pratt.
Hi, everyone. Christopher Pratt with the Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County, Water Division.
Daniel Simpson.
Daniel Simpson, City Engineer of Oldsmar.
David Glitzberg.
Good afternoon, David Glicksberg with Hillsborough County Environmental Services Division.
David John.
I'm a environmental mitigation banker and a professional engineer, water resources. Here as an observer, we're currently completing the construction and revitalization of the Mangrove Point Mitigation Bank in Ruskin by the E.G. Simmons Regional Park. So I'll be involved in the region for quite some time going forward and plan to participate in some form.
Welcome. Digna Rueda.
Hi, everybody. My name is Digna Rueda. I am a biological oceanographer working at the College of Marine Science. And for now, I'm just an observer, a concerned citizen.
Thanks. Doug Robeson.
Hey, sorry, I was on mute. Doug Robeson, I'm a senior scientist with ESA. Currently working on the Tampa Bay swim plan update, so interested to participate in this workshop. Thanks.
Emma Dontos.
Hi all, I'm Emma Dontos. I'm an environmental scientist with Pinellas County. And we monitor Old Tampa Bay regularly, so this is of particular interest to us.
Erica Moulton.
Hi, I'm Erica Moulton. I'm the STEM director at St. Petersburg College at our STEM Center, where we are doing a living shoreline project and also engaging students in research. So very interested.
Barb Goding. Barb, we don't hear you yet. You might be muted. Barb also works at EPC. Jamie Swindes.
Hi, Jamie Swindes with the swim program, naturals at SwiftMed, sorry.
Jeff Leachy.
Hi, this is Jeff Lichty with Audubon, Florida. We work with a variety of waterbirds throughout the Tampa Bay area.
Jing Chen.
Hi, I'm a physical oceanographer at USF College of Marine Science. I'm working on the Tampa Bay coastal ocean model.
John McGee.
I'm John McGee with Plant City, just observing.
Juliet Christian.
Hi, I'm Julie Christian with EPC Water Division.
Kendall Jackson.
Hi, I'm an archaeologist and historical ecologist at the University of South Florida. I'm just here to observe. Thanks.
Kim Yates.
Hi, I'm Kim Yates with the U.S. Geological Survey, and I'm here to observe at this point to learn how this work might inform our ongoing acidification research and monitoring that's in collaboration with the Estuary Program.
Lindsay Painter.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Painter. I'm with the consulting firm Brown and Caldwell, and I'm just an observer today.
Lizan Garcia.
Good afternoon. I'm Lizan Garcia with the Southwest Florida Water Management District in the swim section. As Doug Robeson mentioned, we are updating the Tampa Bay swim plan, and I'm here to see what's going on in Old Tampa Bay. I've been working in the area for a while. Thank you.
Margaret Gates.
Hello, I'm just here as a citizen observer.
Welcome. Maria Morel.
Yeah, hi, Maria Merrill. I'm a biologist with Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. I work on habitat restoration projects, and I am just listening in today.
Mark Walton.
Good afternoon. I'm Mark Walton from SwiftMud Swim Section.
Mary Matz.
Hello, I am an observer today, and I'm with the Sierra Club Conservation Group.
Matthew Goolsby.
Hey everyone, Matt Goolsby with Applied Sciences Consulting, just here to listen in.
Leo Moros.
Hi everyone, name is Leo Myros. I am a biological scientist with Florida Fish and Wildlife's Manatee Research Group. I'm currently working with warm water research grant for NOAA Restore, looking at warm water habitats, and I'm just an observer here.
Melanie Weed.
Good afternoon, everyone. Melanie Weed, Division Director for Pinellas County Environmental Management.
Next, I have Melissa with no last name.
Sorry about that. Melissa Harrison, Pinellas County Environmental Management.
Hey, Melissa. Michael McManus.
Hi, this is Mike McManus. I'm an ecologist with the EPA's Office of Research and Development.
Michelle Holton.
I'm Michelle Holton with Hillsborough County Environmental Services Division.
Mike Wessel.
Mike Wessel with Chiniki Environmental.
Randy Edwards. Randy, your audio is not coming through, but we see you talking. I see you.
This is Randy Edwards. I'm a member of the Sarasota Bay TAC, have been a member, a charter member for over 30 years, retired scientist from USF St. Pete, and I'm here because I'm interested in one particular issue, the potential for using bivalve filtration as a way to remedy phytoplankton blooms.
Ray Pribble.
This is Ray Pribble, Chiniki Environmental.
RJ. Roger Johansson.
Hi, I'm with the Chiniki Environmental, and I is currently working on a project with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program to relate light availability to seagrass growth.
That's right. Bob Weissberg.
Hi, I'm a professor of physical oceanography at USF, College of Marine Science. My area is ocean circulation. My group developed the Tampa Bay Coastal Ocean Model that has very high resolution in Old Tampa Bay, which I think is needed to study this problem.
Rosa Donovan.
Hello, I work with the Hillsborough County's Conservation and Environmental Lands Management Department. Specifically, I help with monitoring plants and animals on our preserves.
Sarah Kaminsky.
Hello, I'm Sarah Kaminsky. I'm a research assistant in the Harmful Algal Blooms group at the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute.
Sarah Kessler.
Hi, this is Sarah Kessler, environmental specialist with the City of Clearwater.
Sarah Herndon.
Hi, everyone. Sarah Herndon. I'm the Habitat Restoration Director at Tampa Bay Watch.
Shelby Bushman.
Hi, Shelby Boschman, City of Largo Environmental Services.
Steve Swanson.
Hi, I'm Steve Swanson. I'm with St. Pete Audubon here as an observer, because we like to keep our bird's eye view on what's happening in Tampa Bay.
Steve Myers. Not hearing Steve. He's also with the University of South Florida. He doesn't have a mic. Steve West.
Steve West with Janicki Environmental.
And I failed to introduce Sugandha Shankar earlier in the meeting because she wasn't listed as an organizer at the top. But Sugandha, you want to give it an intro?
Yeah, hi, this is Sugandha Shankar. I am a researcher at FWRI. I work on HABs and their toxins, and I am the other co-PI with Kerry Lopez on this project.
Tara Amreda.
Hi, I'm Tara Armetta. I'm here on behalf of State Representative Linda Cheney. I'm her district aide, and she represents District 69 here locally.
Tara Shira.
Hi, Tara Shiro, part of the swim section at SwiftMud, and I assist with the seagrass hunters with Chris Anastasio.
Tom Reese.
Tom Reese with Environmental Science Associates, working on the swim plan with Doug Robeson. Thanks.
Tiara Frederick.
Hi, this is Tiara Frederick. I'm Save the Manatee Club's manatee biologist, and I'm just observing today.
Tom Ash.
Tom Ash, Environmental Protection Commission.
Troy Green.
I'm Troy Green, Hillsborough County Environmental Services Division.
Tyler Murray.
Hi, Tyler Murray. I work for the University of South Florida Institute for Marine Remote Sensing. I'm a systems and software engineer, just observing today.
Brett Urson.
Hello, everyone. Brett Urson, Environmental Protection Commission, Water Division.
Vicki Parsons. Not hearing you, Vicki, but Vicki's editor for Bay Soundings, local environmental. Oh, there's your mic. Go ahead, Vicki.
I'm Vicki Parsons, editor of Bay Soundings.
Whitney Costner. Not hearing audio from Whitney. Will Van Gelder.
Will Van Gelder, SwiftMud Swim Program, Senior ES, part of the Seagrass team led by Chris A.
And Gang Liu.
My name is Yungang Liu from USF College of Marine Science, physical oceanographer.
Yunfang Sun.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yunfang Sun. I'm from USF College of Marine Science.
Zach Sampson.
Yep, I am a journalist here. I'm the environmental reporter for the Tampa Bay Times.
Did I appear to miss anyone in the list that joined late? If so, please unmute yourself and say hi.
Hi, this is Chris Kaufman from NOAA's Restoration Center.
Hey, Chris. Anyone else I missed? Well, we're rivaling our number from this morning's meeting, so I appreciate everybody's participation this afternoon. I know it's been a long day of meetings, but we think they're very important topics to continue the discussion. Like I said, on moving forward on adaptively managing some of the issues we're dealing with in the Tampa Bay watershed. So I think what we're planning to do to start is give you a brief intro on some of the topics surrounding Old Tampa Bay, and then head into what the specifics of this grant, this NOAA Actionable Science Grant, means. So I'll give an intro on Old Tampa Bay issues, and then Kerry will take over on sort of the grant objectives and deliverable outlines. And then we really want you to stick around towards the end. We're not going to be talking about you this entire 2-hour meeting window. We want your feedback, and that's going to come at the tail end when Maya gives the stakeholder needs assessment. So I'm going to jump right into it, and I'm going to blast through sort of an intro on Old Tampa Bay. You guys see my screen now?
Yep, it's all good.
So this intro is not meant to be exhaustive in terms of everything historically that has occurred in terms of research or our understanding of Old Tampa Bay, but some of the more contemporary information we've been dealing with on how to manage the system. Again, we've been working on issues in Old Tampa Bay going back to the start of the program, and this is sort of our evolving evolution of how we continue to manage the system as the ecology has been changing throughout the course of our overall start. So, you know, this kind of gives you an overview of what we're planning in terms of this intro, but you know, this isn't our first time dealing with issues in Old Tampa Bay. This isn't our first rodeo. I'll give you some ideas on sort of the unique characteristics that why we think this bay segment might be struggling in terms of its restoration of seagrasses and poor water quality conditions in comparison to some of the other bay segments, and also give you some ideas on some of our prior research initiatives and findings. Again, these aren't supposed to be exhaustive review of everything that has been done in the Old Tampa Bay watershed, but we wanted to give you a general background to just have that awareness and being informed when we get to the stakeholder assessment and feedback portion of this program. This is, you know, our evolving model of adaptively managing the system. You know, the water quality perturbations that we see today are primarily centered around summertime pyrodinium blooms we feel in this bay segment, and that management of the system moving forward is largely driven by some of the current expression of nutrients and some of the physical alterations that have been experienced in the Old Tampa Bay segment throughout its course and history of development. And then I'll end up and kind of talk about how we've been developing this conceptual and evolving management model, primarily using the Nitrogen Management Consortium and some of the working groups we've developed through that group to develop reasonable assurance documents to adhere to a federally recognized TMDL and our nutrient management paradigm for Tampa Bay. And the last thing I just want to mention, we are pursuing this new initiative with eyes wide open in terms of stakeholder involvement and engagement in getting your feedback and guiding the research that will foster some needed management action in this Old Tampa Bay segment. And this is much in the same way we're viewing sort of our open science model of, you know, exposing the data and exposing the analyses so that we could bridge the gap between the science and management and policy divide. And in much the same way in how we develop research initiatives in this particular bay segment, we really want to have input from stakeholders and the managers alike so that we could basically, you know, remove the barrier for implementation on projects that we think will have a long-term benefit for the recovery of this system. So, you know, I give that long-winded intro just to say that, you know, we're really seeking your input throughout the course of today's event and our follow-up stakeholder engagements through the course of this grant.
So there are no observers only today. Everybody's participating in this project.
Yes, thank you, Maya. Again, you'll be hearing a lot from our group about that. We don't want to talk at you guys this entire meeting. We want your feedback. You know, just to give background for those unfamiliar with sort of our model of success in the Tampa Bay region, you know, we've been very vigilant on trying to control nutrient loadings and inputs to the Tampa Bay watershed, and we've used a simplistic management paradigm to, you know, manage water quality for the benefit of seagrass recovery. And we've been largely successful in the region in that respect, in that we've ratcheted down on the total amount of nutrients flowing into Tampa Bay. And we've seen improvements in water quality that have translated to gains in seagrass coverage. We've peaked in terms of seagrass coverage extent in the Tampa Bay, in Tampa Bay proper in 2016, but most recently, as most know, have been involved with some of the discussions of the ESHRO program. We've had sort of this lagging response in Old Tampa Bay and a recent downturn in terms of total seagrass coverage in the Bay. that we think is related to some of the poor water quality conditions we're seeing, primarily in the upper bay segments. And that's why we're keying in and focusing on Old Tampa Bay, because it's fairly unique in the sense of its expression of nutrients relative to the other bay segments. And a lot of that is probably due to sort of its historical development. You know, there's about a 3-to-1 ratio of land area to the open waters in this particular bay segment. Of those lands, about 66% or about 2/3 of those lands are tied up in urban or suburban development. So it's a highly developed portion of the Tampa Bay watershed. Of the total freshwater inputs to the bay, those stemming in Old Tampa Bay represent about 20% of the total. This is looking at averages that are linked to in those yellow hyperlinks to some of the loading information we now have online through some of our open science portals. And that 20% of freshwater input translates to about 17.5% of the total load to Tampa Bay on average. So we know that, you know, the rivers on the east side of the bay contribute probably the largest amount of freshwater input and nutrient loading into the system proper. But really, what happens in Old Tampa Bay with the freshwater input and loads that go into it are really subject to probably other alterations that have occurred throughout its history. And this slide is just kind of summarizing some of the things that we know about in terms of alterations to the tidal circulation patterns, as well as the hydrologic inputs through the land development activities that have occurred within the watershed. You know, going back to the early 1920s, one of the first circulation impediments was construction of the Courtney Campbell Causeway, which began in the 1920s, and some work later on by Dr. Steve Myers and USF indicated that, you know, if you removed all these infrastructure impediments within the bay, you'd see a dramatically scene in terms of circulation and flushing. And I think some of the other modeling work that Dr. Weissberg was alluding to also suggests, you know, these profound causal infrastructure impediments have changed the circulation and ultimately the ecological expression of freshwater inputs and nitrogen load inputs into this particular bay segment. And I also don't want to discount a lot of the ditching and draining that has occurred throughout the upper portions of the watershed, particularly, you know, the connection of the Lake Tarpon outfall into Safety Harbor. We've done some prior work looking at sediment accumulation associated with the outfall canal and some discharges there, and also some of the other ditching and draining that has occurred along the mangrove fringe and some of the tidal creek systems in the past. All that has, you know, historically created a different sort of circulation and input dynamic in this portion of the Tampa Bay watershed. And ultimately that has caused issues in the past. That has led to other initiatives of the estuary program and some of our monitoring and research partners to kind of understand why this bay segment has lagged in terms of recovery relative to other portions of Tampa Bay. We performed some studies called our Feather Sound studies 1 and 2 in the mid to late 2000s, and that was in response to poor water quality conditions that were experienced over the 2002 through 2004 period, and really the lack of recovery of seagrasses along this shallow flat that we affectionately call the Feather Sound hump area of Old Tampa Bay. This is just northwest of the Howard Franklin Bridge. And this area represents a large area of potential seagrass recovery, somewhere on the order of 1,000 to 2,000 acres of seagrass that come and go oftentimes depending on freshwater inputs to the system, as well as, you know, how bad water quality is in a given year. So some of those early studies really indicated that this Old Tampa Bay segment, particularly this western portion of Old Tampa Bay, is marginal at best in terms of its expression of nutrient loads into this system. And there's really no smoking guns. There's a variety of actions that might be needed to address the poor recovery of seagrasses in this portion of Old Tampa Bay. Not long after that work was conducted, you know, we embarked on development of an integrated ecosystem model with support from the Water Management District and the estuary program. And we, utilizing a variety of different modeling tools, we simulated what potential improvements could be had, particularly over a period of from 2000 to 2009, if we implemented very large-scale management actions in this bay segment. We were recognizing at that time that much of the low-hanging fruit in the bay has been already pursued and implemented in terms of moving some of our point sources to advanced treatment, and some of the other initiatives at the time were focused on these larger scale infrastructure impediments and hydrologic inputs and how those could be implemented in combination with nutrient controls to better support ecosystem recovery in Old Tampa Bay. So the development of that model was really aimed at providing simulations of those large scale projects so that we would get a better idea of what would give us the biggest bang for the buck in terms of implementing these large scale projects. We know they weren't going to be cheap to implement. I do want to highlight, that simulation period was over the 2000 to 2009 period, and really that was at the tail end of when we've started seeing a potential change in the ecology of the Old Tampa Bay system. We started getting very persistent summertime blooms of a particular algal species called Pyridinium bahaments in this portion of Old Tampa Bay, starting around the 2008 time period. And ever since that time period, we've been seeing sort of this increasing trend. This is work that Marcus has done and presented at the Nitrogen Management Consortium and Old Tampa Bay Working Group. So we've seen sort of a change in the Old Tampa Bay's response to nutrient loadings, primarily some of the hydrologic anomalies that have occurred over the contemporary period. And we've seen this increasing trend of more intense pyridinium blooms, and this is emphasized here on the screen. So this is looking at seasonal distributions of chlorophyll A conditions in the Old Tampa Bay segment, and what Marcus's analysis shows sort of this increasing trend, particularly in the summertime, of increasing pyridinium blooms, and it might be related to these hydrologic anomalies that we're now experiencing in this portion of Old Tampa Bay. And that could be driving the system more towards its marginal, sort of marginal water quality that's supportive of persistent seagrass beds. And coincidentally, some of the other things we started looking at is sort of the loading conditions that we've been experiencing over this contemporary period. And if you match it up against our annual water quality assessments looking at light environment and chlorophyll A over the historic period, and that's that graph on the bottom. The red, yellow, and green relay a management response in relation to water quality conditions on an annual basis. If you look at sort of the loading conditions in this portion of Old Tampa Bay, you see sort of this increased, this coincident increasing trend of non-point sources, and those years where we're not meeting water quality conducive and supportive of seagrass recovery oftentimes coincide with these peak stormwater inputs that we're now experiencing in this particular bay segment. So a lot of the rainfall and hydrologic anomalies we think are sort of driving some sort of this expression of pyridinium blooms now, and some of the poor water quality conditions that might be not as supportive to seagrass recovery in Old Tampa Bay. And just again, highlighting some more recent work. This is a presentation that Alex Illick provided to the consortium last year as well, of using remote sense information to tease out finer scale temporal water quality conditions in the Old Tampa Bay segment. This was just looking at that period of time between 2018 and 2020, where we saw a significant decline of seagrass resources throughout the Tampa Bay watershed. And his analysis kind of matched up pretty nicely with what we observed in terms of those seagrass coverage estimates performed by the district. It looks like we had fairly marginal water quality conditions throughout 2019 leading up to that 2020 seagrass assessment. And indeed, when those numbers were reported earlier this year, we saw these fairly huge declines in seagrass resources, throughout the Tampa Bay watershed, but in particular, and most, the highest magnitude was in Old Tampa Bay, where we lost about 4,000 acres of seagrass between that 2018 and 2020 assessment period. So all this is, all this being said is, this is what is driving this initiative that we're working on now is, this sort of marginal system characteristic of the Old Tampa Bay watershed, and this recent expression and loss of seagrass resources. So as we think about how we can manage the system moving forward, we don't want to lose sight of nutrients. That is always going to be, I think, the bread and butter of our initiatives and our focus moving forward in the Tampa Bay watershed, particularly with an ever-expanding coastal population and continued development of the watershed. We can't lose sight that continue to hold the line on nutrient inputs into the bay are important. But there are these other potential complementary actions that could be implemented that could help us, reduce the marginality of the system moving forward. And that I heard a term that Dr. Chuck Jacoby kind of threw out this morning in relation to what Indian River Lagoon is experiencing as late. He described it as a very flashy system, and I think that's what potentially Old Tampa Bay might be trending toward, is sort of these flashy marginal characteristics on the verge of potential more trouble in terms of the bay's ecology. So we want to catch this early on and really look at ways that we could, continue to sustain a healthy ecosystem in this portion of Old Tampa Bay. And, we started working on projects to potentially improve tidal circulation. The DOT implemented a bridge construction project on the Courtney Campbell Causeway that had very localized benefits in terms of seagrass resources north of where that new bridge was constructed. And then some recent work also by FWC and the estuary program was looking at the potential for shellfish restoration in Old Tampa Bay to further create some balance in terms of the ecosystem in this portion of Tampa Bay. And both these are very much targeted and focused at addressing the current expression of nutrients in Old Tampa Bay as it relates to pyridinium blooms, particularly persistent summertime pyridinium blooms in the Old Tampa Bay proper. So really those two sort of management action implementation research topics are what we're looking for your input on as we move forward to adaptively manage the system. And again, we think it fits into this overall model of trying to support the overall recovery of the bay through nutrient management, but also kind of addressing the other perturbations that we know have an influence on the expression of poor water quality conditions in this segment. So that's where I'm kind of shifting more the conversation of how this fits into our overall management paradigms and relationships that we've established through the Nitrogen Management Consortium. Back in the mid-1990s, the Nitrogen Management Consortium was the primary body that we facilitated in terms of implementing actions to reduce nutrient loads to Tampa Bay. And we've been pursuing a fairly routine process of updating reasonable assurance document that we delivered to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and the US EPA in response to a federally recognized TMDL for all the Tampa Bay segments. And again, that reasonable assurance update has been centered around controlling nutrients for the benefit of improving water quality to sustain seagrass coverage or to recover seagrass in the Tampa Bay watershed. And as we move forward and implementing some of this objectives of the grant, we're looking at sort of these nitrogen plus actions. It's really those complementary activities being pursued by the consortium and other initiatives that we need to do in terms of being responsible to developing that reasonable assurance document, because portions of that document outline proposed actions that we as a collective research management and decision and policymaking group within the Tampa Bay watershed, it outlines what we need to do to further get our bay back on track. And again, this NOAA Actionable Science Grant is driving us towards this stakeholder integration to help guide the research that will get us over the hump in terms of implementation barriers that we've been observing recently in terms of these large-scale infrastructure improvements, as well as other more difficult restoration activities that take a lot of capital to implement, but also a lot of will and decision maker impetus and buy-in in order to get it over the goal line. And again, I think all these collective actions are going to be needed to get this bay segment back on track, just because of its ecology and sort of its marginal expression of what we experience in terms of water quality conditions in this bay segment. So this grant, again, will help us get us to across that finish line and guide activities moving forward to overcome that science to management divide. So I'll kind of stop there. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have, but this is, again, just to give a 10,000-foot overview of where we're at in terms of the state of the science of Old Tampa Bay and how this initiative could complement existing activities and also enhance our management activities as we move forward in the future. So I'll stop there. I don't know if anyone had any other questions, but I'd be happy to entertain those.
Hey, this is Chris.
Yeah.
Hey, great overview. One of the things I was going to ask you, and I guess just as a point of discussion for the group, we talk a lot about sea level rise, we talk a lot about rainfall patterns, and that's certainly, I think, a major driver, like you said, in Old Tampa Bay. But I was wondering what your thoughts were on temperature change, both in terms of air temperature and sea surface temperature. I know we talked a little bit about that earlier in our meeting, our seagrass meeting, but I was just want to throw that out there and see what your thoughts were on how that might be driving some of the changes that we're seeing.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know you brought that up this morning and in prior conversations we had. I think that's temperature, not in the sense of bay water temperatures, but regionally in terms of temperatures and how we respond as in terms of the resiliency actions are our topic of discussion through the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. We've done some modeling work to look at sea level rise increases, but not specifically temperature trends that we're now seeing in the bay. So I think it's part of the mix that we need to have a conversation around because it could definitely change primary production responses in the bay and particularly centered around some of the algae of concern. So I appreciate you raising the point, and I think it's part of the feedback we're looking for. Any other questions until?
Yes. This is Randy Edwards again.
Hey, Randy.
I think you brought up a good point when your discussion about the pyridinium blooms. It brings up kind of a shortcoming of what has been done, not just in Tampa Bay, but everywhere, mainly driven by the EPA approach of these types of issues, and that is seasonality. Seagrasses probably, most likely, do not decline because of annual geometric means. They decline during episodes of bad water quality, low light, low DO, possibly high sulfide in the sediments and so forth. And I highly recommend, to the extent possible, with the resources possible, at least allocate some resources to look at the seasonality of seagrasses declines and what times and what conditions under which they are declining. I think it might give you some new ways to address the problem without just looking at total TMDLs for annual geometric mean and so forth. That's my comment.
Yeah, thanks, Randy, for that. I think we're in conversations with a couple of researchers looking at finer temporal scale looks at seagrass conditions relative to water quality. So I think your point's well taken. We're trying to look at data sources that might get at some of those questions that you just brought up.
Hey, Ed, this is Chris again. Just to follow on to that, one of the things that we're looking at is taking the imagery that we collect for mapping seagrass and actually looking at those successional changes that you don't necessarily see when you're just classifying seagrass as either patchy or continuous, but actually looking at the imagery itself. We've done that actually for Feather Sound, and you can definitely see a gradual change from seagrass over to the majority of that Feather Sound area, that the hump that you called it in 2020 was mostly chlorpa. So I think there's some opportunity to look at the imagery itself and start to look at some of those successional changes a little bit more carefully than just the way we do it for the maps.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Chris was saying, you can see some of those successional changes in the products that SwiftMud produces every 2 years or so, which definitely gets at sort of interannual changes. Like Feather Sound, for example, you could see it, transitioning between the different classes of seagrasses, and then sometimes going to the algae flux codes, and then sand in some places. And so you can look at that at trends over time at the annual scale. But I agree that the question of seasonal succession is one that is I think difficult to address with the data sources we have currently available.
And there are a couple of good questions from John Bratton in the chat, and I see his camera's on, so he might be able to ask them.
Yeah, I mean, there's some specific questions, but I guess the broader question is, what are the capabilities of your existing old Tampa Bay models, particularly in terms of mechanistic understanding of seagrass growth and sediment diagenesis, not just water column stuff or loading stuff? And then the second question is related to it in the sense of what are your primary management options that are being considered right now, and do you have the ability to simulate what the expected impacts would be using existing models?
Yeah, the first question related to the modeling components. The model simulation period that we developed was over the 2000-2009 period, and the chlorophyll A water quality model used, RCA, was good at providing an average chlorophyll condition relative to the large-scale management actions that we simulated back then. But really, that was sort of at the tail end of when pyridinium was occurring. So we do think that the ecology has changed, and some of the mechanistic models that we developed in the past probably are not simulating what's occurring now very well, sort of those peak conditions we're seeing in the summertime algal blooms. And that could be a component of this research that's needed moving forward to further develop our mechanistic understanding of water quality conditions. So there is, I think, a little bit more work that could be done in terms of understanding sediment diagenesis and nutrient recycling in this portion of Old Tampa Bay, because we had very limited data to calibrate that original model back over the 2000-2009 period. In terms of your second question, in terms of management actions, we looked at large-scale point source and non-point source reductions in combination with hydrologic, specific hydrologic input modifications, like looking at specific outfall canals and removing some of those specific inputs. And then we also modeled and simulated several bridge and causeway alteration scenarios. They were fairly limited in scope in terms of not removing all the causeway per se. So there are probably some updates based on what is practical and what has been implemented in terms of the model bridge construction project that DOT did in 2019 that we could probably look at with fresh eyes based on implementation of that project. So those are all sort of, I think, initiatives that could be explored and further elaborated on through development of this work.
Was there actual monitoring, kind of baseline monitoring, and then sort of post mitigation measure monitoring, like bridge modifications, et cetera, to see what the actual impact was compared to the expected impact?
There was, and a lot of it was tied to, I believe, salinity and residence time measures rather than actual seagrass measurements, as far as I understand. So that monitor is ongoing since it was just constructed in 2019. So.
Right. Sounds like time for some more modeling.
You got the idea.
I would say that, wouldn't I?
So Carrie, you want to take over now? I know we probably went longer than we needed to there, so I apologize for that.
No, that's okay. I shared my screen, but I'm on a one screen, so I can't tell if I shared it correctly.
You're good. We see it.
You're good.
Okay. All right, great. So this talk is really just to give a broad overview to introduce everyone to the Actionable Science Grant through the NOAA Restore program that Ed was talking about. This talk is going to be first just general overview of the Actionable Science Grants from a broader perspective regarding their purpose and the timeline. And then I'll talk specifically about the grant that was funded for Tampa Bay, and I'll go over a little bit more about the rationale that Ed talked about behind the proposed project, the deliverables, and the timeline. So the NOAA awards that were funded as a result of that 2020 funding opportunity from this program are one-year planning grants. So they're not conducting research, they're planning for research. And these grants have specific criteria. One is that they are driven by a specific resource management decision. And the other is that they're collaborative and that the research plan, as Ed mentioned, is co-produced by researchers and resource managers. And the reason NOAA made this a requirement was so that research findings that result from this will be more likely to be used by managers if they're involved from the start. And as we said, this is a one-year project that started in September and will end next August. How the Restore program envisions the general flow of these awards. So we have the planning grant timeline shown in blue, but in addition, there'll be a federal funding opportunity for the science awards that will come out in summer 2022, and so that's timed so that the planning awards are wrapping up, and so the research that is funded by this next FFO will be to support these strong research initiatives that are backed by this co-produced planning, and so that would ideally be funded, and then those projects would be 3 years, and then the idea is that the findings from the research would then support decisions from 2026 and beyond. Okay, so with that in mind, I'll move to the details of the Tampa Bay project that was funded. And so this focuses on filling knowledge gaps to better address pyridinium blooms in Old Tampa Bay to enhance Tampa Bay recovery. So this is a collaborative project between FWRI and the Tampa Bay Estuary Program with the intention that the Nitrogen Management Consortium will be, and the Old Tampa Bay Working Group will be involved throughout the project. As Ed said, in this project, we focused on, or we proposed 2 targeted alternative management actions One is improving tidal circulation and hydrology, and the other is increasing mollusk and shellfish populations. But that said, I have this underlined because it's important. This initial focus of the work is to refine and finalize the scope of the project with input from the community. And then the deliverables of this project will be a research and application plan, and those will be co-developed over the course of this one-year project. And so I just want to kind of reiterate the background on the rationale for the proposed targeted actions. And they both really stem for looking for additional ways in which biomass or algal biomass might be controlled. And so this equation, biomass equals growth minus loss, is a really simplified view that essentially boils down all the various interactions to one in which biomass buildup will result when all the factors contributing to algal growth or population growth are greater than those that contribute to population loss. So through management actions, we can target to aim to reduce growth and increase loss components. And that's why nutrient reductions are so important. And we focus on those because nutrients are important for cellular growth, as you all know. And so it's important to minimize this component, minimize cellular growth. And that's a big focus. But the idea is that we can also, and I stress also, target mechanisms that may increase losses. And so I've listed some different contributing factors to cellular loss for pyridinium, but I've highlighted specifically physical transport and grazing, and because those seem to be more feasible to address with management strategies that are more likely to have a benefit in the long term. We know that Old Tampa Bay has long residence time with limited circulation, as Ed talked about. So restoring some circulation patterns could be a potential strategy to reduce biomass accumulation and lessen blooms. We also know shellfish can be very efficient grazers of algal biomass in general, and that shellfish populations are much lower than what they were historically. So that's another avenue that may have potential. Of course, associated with these actions are uncertainties that we may need to address with research, or that we do need to address with research. For example, pyridinium has competitive advantages that challenge management and how we think about population growth and loss. It's a dinoflagellate, so it can swim. It vertically migrates in the water column, and so that can complicate how one might model physical transport or consumption by grazers. It also produces toxins, and that can affect grazers and potentially have trophic implications. And we know that many HAB species have different flexibility as far as nutrient uptake and use, and so that might be something that's important to consider for pyridinium. And then what scale, of a hydrologic change or shellfish restoration is needed to actually, affect loss rates. These are all uncertainties that we think are important to explore. But that said, part of this process is to identify and prioritize these uncertainties and others that challenge management decisions or that are most relevant for management decisions. And then to identify and prioritize the research needs to address those uncertainties. So to the timeline, this slide outlines the general timeline, kind of divided up in quarters with the sort of general phases along here on the top. So right now we're in the scoping phase where we're having this initial workshop. We're going to be using this feedback to inform the development of a research synthesis. And then we'll also be using the feedback to refine the initial project scope. We'll then move on to the, assessing the alternative management actions, identifying needs for the OTB integrated model, designing management scenarios, and then identifying uncertainties and designing the research questions to address those. And then from there, we'll be moving on to drafting the research and development plan. And then hopefully, by the end of the project, we'll be focused on gathering feedback from you all on the plans and finalizing those. And then if we follow this timeline, you can see that around this time will also be when that FFO I mentioned for the science awards will be announced or is expected to come out. So, and then also will be, the findings of the planning project can be integrated into the 2022 reasonable assurance update. So there are various avenues for the research to be integrated into management decisions, and I'm sure this will be an iterative process, but importantly, we've identified that, as Ed talked about, that the findings from the planning projects can be integrated in the 2022 update. And then the research project findings that come out of this can hopefully be integrated into the 2027 process. And then, so before I end my talk, I just want to revisit this timeline of where we are today to emphasize what we need from you all today. So this initial workshop, as I said, will inform the development of the research synthesis and refining the project scope. So now we really need your participation and feedback through this interactive stakeholder needs assessment. And an active discussion of these questions from everyone would be greatly appreciated. And I think it will just, the more active engagement we can get, the better product we'll have. So I'll stop here, and I can take any questions, or I can pass the control to Maya so that she can start the needs assessment.
Any questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Can I make a comment early? Because I don't plan to be attending the entire meeting because I'm not part of your group. But we had
We welcome everyone, Randy. You're part of the group if you're here.
Well, not regularly, I'll say. Anyway, we had a similar kind of situation in Sarasota Bay that we were involved with. I considered through the technical advisory committee, and that was this large canal in Siesta Key called the Grand Canal, 8 miles long, and the residents there are seeing terrible declines in water quality, so much so that it's actually aesthetically unpleasing, bad looking water, bad smelling water. And a group of residents were convinced to address this through biological filtration, largely like you're talking about, and that was to install this product called the mini reefs under docks in the Grand Canal. And so in looking into that, I did some calculations and ecological considerations. And the conclusion is this, that it is very difficult to envision enough biological molluscan filtration that will have a significant impact on the water quality. Not only is it not likely to make much of an impact in the long run, it can be negative. And let me explain why I say this. Because these filter feeders will filter out phytoplankton from the water. They produce enormous amounts of feces and pseudofeces. These sediment to the bottom of the canal or the bottom of Old Tampa Bay, and they are rapidly remineralized, providing more nitrogen to allow more phytoplankton to grow. And looking in the literature, I was astounded to find out that the phytoplankton regeneration time is on the order of a half a day to 1 day. So if you're putting in nutrients coming back from the sediments, you're just allowing more of these phytoplanktons to grow, and you're going to have very little impact. And in the long run, you're reducing the export of nutrients because they're going to the sediment instead of transported out of the system, exported as water nutrients or even phytoplankton nutrients. So you face that same kind of situation in Tampa Bay. And my strong advice to you is to be very careful. I'm glad to hear this is a planning project. But I highly advise that you do some very thorough analyses of how much filtration is actually reasonably possible in Tampa Bay through bivalve restoration. I suspect it's fairly low, probably not much more than what the mini reefs could do in the Grand Canal compared to the great volume and size of Old Tampa Bay compared to the areas where these organisms can grow. But you need to understand the actual possible rate, not the rate of filtration, but the possible impact, considering that the phytoplankton are going to regenerate. And then furthermore, you need to start to consider the effect on further eutrophication in Tampa Bay, because this sedimentation of these phytoplanktons are trapping nutrients and will possibly make Old Tampa Bay even more eutrophic. So to do the first thing that you really need to do is to do these thoughtful scientific analysis and decide the degree to which this is possible. And I'll end this by explaining why this is so important. Ed was talking about potential modifications to the causeway. Can you imagine you're a decision maker or you're an elected official in the county or city governments and somebody, or FDOT, and somebody asks you that we need to open up flow through these causeways. It's going to cost billions and millions of dollars. And that person is probably not a very well-trained environmentalist. And they're going to say, well, no, we're going to address it with planting clams and shellfish in Tampa Bay. We're not going to do that until we see whether this works or not. And that's the kind of situation I have run into in my entire career. People will latch on to these kinds of ideas. They may be sound, but not really that powerful. And they will see them as a silver bullet, and they will then be a detriment to the real important actions. And I'll quit now as I'm getting a little note here.
Yeah, thanks, Randy. I appreciate that. Your points are well taken, and that's, I think, what's driving this planning initiative is understanding the research needed to really get at those questions that you raised. So I appreciate your input, and it's definitely something we've been thinking on in terms of, no silver bullets for sure in the Old Tampa Bay watershed. So Maya, I'm going to turn it over to you because we really want this stakeholder feedback portion of the program to encompass most of what we're trying to achieve from this meeting. So thank you.
So as you've heard, today is also about you and your active participation in this project. We've talked with many of you. You've heard these ideas and these problems discussed at our various TAC and NMC meetings for a number of years now. And so one of the goals of this project is to understand what it's going to take from a research perspective to move beyond talking about these problems to actually doing something to address them proactively. So we have a series of questions set up that we would welcome your feedback, whether you're here as an observer or as an interested citizen or as part of our management conference. We still would like to know, and we think it would be beneficial if you participated in this survey. So I did put a link in the chat to go to the Mentimeter survey. That's the instrument that we'll be using to walk through today. I also have it up on the screen here. So the first question in this survey is really just to make sure that you understand what you're getting into by participating in the survey. So we're trying to assess your attitudes and your knowledge about the potential management actions that we're looking to understand to improve water quality in Old Tampa Bay. There's no risk for participating. There's also no direct benefit. There's no compensation, and really the biggest benefit is that you have the opportunity to make your experiences and your views known to us as researchers and management agencies. We'll keep your information confidential to the extent that we can, complying with Sunshine Law, and it's totally voluntary. If you choose not to participate, we understand, but we hope that you do. I'm going to, you have the opportunity to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, whether you consent and agree to continue participating. I'm just gonna wait a minute to see kind of what number we're hitting, looks like we have 82 people in the room and we're at 25 responses. So I'd like to get at least above 30 of you. Okay, we're slowing down to 20.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions on how to access the survey with the directions up on the top of the screen?
What was that, Bob?
How do we access the survey?
I put a link in the chat.
You go to menti.com on a complimentary browser, hopefully that's available to you on your computer, and then enter that code at the top of the slide. That'll get you to the survey.
Okay, hopefully everybody's
good.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to move on to the next question.
Daniel is asking, do we want more than one survey per agency, or shall we pick a spokesperson? I think it's fine to
everyone,
answer.
Yeah, multiple representatives would be great.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first question that we have is for you to really describe your role in relation to Old Tampa Bay. So do you identify as a stormwater manager, as a wastewater manager, as a natural resource manager, something a little more broad, a researcher, private sector consultant? Are you an elected official, a concerned citizen, or other? Do we not capture what you think you are?
Maya, what do you mean by like wastewater manager or stormwater manager? Is that a government entity, or what do you mean by that?
If you work at a wastewater treatment facility and you manage a wastewater permit, if you work, I think you can have a stormwater permit. You can be a stormwater regulator.
Okay.
A consultant working on stormwater issues, potentially.
Okay, I'm gonna move on. Now this question is trying to understand a little bit more about what motivates your work in Tampa Bay. What are you interested about in Old Tampa Bay? Why are you here? What are the things that drive you to want to make Old Tampa Bay better? Is it something like the concept of legacy, being part of the restoration success story in Tampa Bay? Are you performance oriented and you like just doing your job well and having that kind of sense of achievement and accomplishment? Is it simply, you know, your job? This is something you're responsible to do, so you're here to do it. It's how you make a living. Is it collaboration? Is that something that's rewarding to you? Those expectations and meeting those expectations that are shared between you and professional colleagues and peers? Do you love a good challenge and you want to rise up and address the challenges that are in need of innovative solutions? Are you driven by a commitment to some kind of higher purpose, be it spiritual, social, environmental, something like that? You can pick, I think, up to 3 for this one. Did anyone have any comments that they wanted to offer about this question or about the kinds of things that motivate you to work in Old Tampa Bay? Okay, I'm going to move along. So this question is to kind of understand your position within your respective organizations. We want to understand what the scope of your decision-making authority within your organization is. So are you someone who has the authority to make decisions, commit resources, and obligate funds on behalf of your organization? Do you maybe have a limited or delegated authority to make decisions, commit resources, and obligate funds for really specific purposes within your organization? Do you just have the ability to influence others in your organization who do have that kind of authority to make decisions, commit resources, and obligate funds? Are you someone who's maybe influential in the broader community? So you have the ability to influence others that are sort of beyond the reach of your immediate organization who make those kinds of decisions? Or is that really not what your role is and you don't really influence important decisions within your organization? You sort of have a specific set of tasks that you're responsible for, but you have to run decisions up a chain of command. Okay, I'm gonna move on. So for this question, we'd like you to rate your knowledge of the following topics that are important to Old Tampa Bay. So I understand the drivers of poor water quality in Old Tampa Bay. I understand the Tampa Bay nutrient management strategy. I understand the factors affecting pyridinium growth and loss. I understand what management actions are needed to improve water quality in Old Tampa Bay. You're just rating your knowledge of these things, so there's no right or wrong answers, just so we kind of can get a sense of where everybody's at in terms of understanding the problem and how they would tackle it. So something that I think is interesting about the results here is I think there's, you know, pretty decent agreement in terms of the things that are the problem, but the lowest values are more centered around what we need to do to address them, which is sort of what we identified as a reason to pursue this grant opportunity so that we could build capacity to translate and bridge that gap from knowledge to action, from science to policy and implementation. So part of this process is to make sure that we've correctly identified the scope of the problem and that there's consensus around the management need that our project is going to address. And so we're asking, what do you think the management need for the Old Tampa Bay segment is? Do you see the management need, do you see it as needing to reduce the chlorophyll A concentrations below regulatory thresholds? Or do you see it as reducing chlorophyll A concentrations below the decision matrix targets, which are supportive of seagrass growth in this bay segment? Or do you think it's something else that we haven't captured here? And I am going to pause on this one and hopefully we can have a little bit of discussion on here. So as those last 15 or so people are putting in their answers, for those of you that selected other, could I convince maybe a couple of you to unmute and explain what some examples of other management needs for Old Tampa Bay, what you had in mind?
Hey Maya, yeah, I'll so as a self-proclaimed other, I'll kind of explain myself a little bit. So I think chlorophyll is an important parameter to look at as a management tool, but as was implied, and I think Ed, you mentioned it earlier too, that it seems like not even just in Old Tampa Bay, but just regionally, we're entering, or we have entered, a different paradigm potentially, that some of the paradigms or some of the assumptions that we had that have driven our management actions for many years, to a large part, the result of great success, may not apply. So, that old adage, what got you here won't get you there. So I think I put other because I think it's important that we revisit these thresholds and targets, and that we don't necessarily pay so much attention to the numbers. I know that's important in the regulatory framework, but I think this is an opportunity for us to critically look at that, and we are doing that, but I think we need to continue to look at these numbers and say, does 9.3 or 8.5, does that really reflect reality, and does it get us to the expected outcome? Because I think that's where we really have to take some time to think about is managing the expectations. So we reach a target or a threshold, does that get us to where we want to be in terms of the overall health of this particular bay segment? So that's why I put other.
Did anybody else, any other self-proclaimed others, want to offer their thoughts?
Sure, Maya, this is Bob Weissberg. First of all, I haven't been able to find in the chat what to click on, so I'm not involved. So I guess I am an other. I think that in the grand scheme of things, it's really how the region flushes that's going to determine the water quality. And I think we're giving that aspect of it short shrift. And I think we've done that for a long, long time. And just altering tidal flow does not affect flushing. And so you really have to approach the modeling in a way that nature actually works. And so I think in these discussions, we have to revisit how we actually model that portion of Tampa Bay and how we deal with the actual flushing of these water bodies. That's point number one. Point number two is, over the last decade, we've seen tremendous development on the in the region that we're seem to be concerned about, namely from the Gandy Bridge northward on the western side of the bay. And every time we add another house there, we're adding additional problems in that portion of the bay. And I think that needs to be addressed as well. So those are my two other comments.
Thanks, Bob. We appreciate that.
I think along those lines, John Bratton in the chat also said other could include a more holistic set of parameters, optimization of ecosystem services. So I think talking about net ecosystem benefits is another way of developing a management need for the bay segment. John, I don't know if you want to expand upon that.
Yeah, I'll expand briefly. I mean, I think historically, and focus has been on regulations and treating nutrients like pollutants, like PCBs or something else, but they're really fundamentally different. So if the goal was a more a better functioning ecosystem, the package of things that capture that are I think most effectively communicated as ecosystem services, and not just provisioning or supplying humans with very quantifiable services, but aesthetic things, spiritual things, services to the ecosystem itself that are only for the ecosystem, that provide no obvious human benefit. So that seems to be the direction things are going. The trick is how to quantify that and how to manage and regulate for that. But There's a lot of good work going on in that right now in other locations and probably in Tampa Bay as well.
Melissa, will you expand on your thought that reducing chlorophyll is a strategy, but not the only strategy?
Just that reducing chlorophyll is important, but there's also a lot of things that we can do regarding runoff, infrastructure, stormwater management, lake discharges. So there's just a lot of other strategies to look at than just reducing the chlorophyll. That's it.
Why would we pursue those other strategies? What would the outcome be?
Well, I know that, with regards to stormwater management, you have a lot of things that are entering the bay. They're not all chlorophyll causing from runoffs, like sediment, that kind of thing. So having your proper stormwater management in place can prevent a lot of sediment from going into the water. As I recall, Ernest Truby did a study a long time ago about what he found in the sediments. And that was, I want to say, a lot of detrital freshwater skeletons. Somebody on the call might remember that study. And I want to say that his feeling was that a lot of that came as a result of runoff coming from Lake Tarpon. So there's just a lot of, the way the question was worded was that chlorophyll was the management strategy. And I just feel like we have probably a lot more tools in the toolbox than just managing chlorophyll. Yeah, like Danielle said, it's not the management strategy, it's one important strategy.
What's the problem that let me phrase it differently. What's the problem that we need to address in Old Tampa Bay?
Are you talking about in general or with respect to chlorophyll concentrations?
Well, I'm getting a lot of people that are pushing back on the idea that managing chlorophyll, managing nutrients to reduce chlorophyll for the benefit of the seagrass is not the primary management need for Old Tampa Bay. So I'm asking what else would be? How are people thinking about the main problem in Old Tampa Bay?
So, I'll comment again that I think the main problem is getting the water moving a little more quickly and flushing out that portion of the bay a little better. Unless you do that, you're going to continue having environmental difficulties there.
Hi, I selected other, and I selected other for similar reasons, it sounds like, to other people here who selected. My thinking was that I'm just not, I was kind of hoping for a metric of success that was more closely tied to perceivable impacts of people in the bay. I mean, if chlorophyll's the problem, it's not clear to me how that improves the ecosystem, just because I'm not familiar with the science of it. Is that going to promote better biodiversity? Is that going to make the beaches nicer? Some kind of metric like that would make more sense to me, and maybe that is a chlorophyll metric, but the connection wasn't clear to me, so I chose other.
Is there anyone who selected reducing chlorophyll A concentrations below regulatory thresholds that wants to weigh in on the value of chlorophyll A and regulatory thresholds for defining that as the management need? Okay. Well, thanks for some good feedback on this question. I think this gives us a little bit to chew on as a team.
Good feedback in the chat as well that will integrate into our documentation.
Okay. Gonna go to the next question. So the next series of questions are about some of the potential management actions that we either have already pursued or are considering specifically within the scope of this grant proposal. So one is shellfish restoration aquaculture. So I've got a picture of what we're talking about, things like bagged shellfish that can be rotated in and out of the system. Causeway alterations, so like bridge expansion, circulation cuts in causeways, things like that. Additional stormwater BMPs, nutrient load reductions. So there's a picture of control structure and skimmer box there. And then flood control structure modifications. By that I mean things like things like the Lake Tarpon outfall canal, channels A and G, or some of the tidal tributaries, which are also conveying floodwaters from the land to Old Tampa Bay. So I want to make sure that you all understand that that's sort of what I mean when I'm referring to each of these. So if you understand, give me a thumbs up. If any are unclear to you, give me a question mark, and we can seek clarification, make sure everybody kind of understands. See, one person's already hit the question mark. So so if you're unclear about what any of these potential management actions are, unmute yourself and let me know which one's unclear still.
Hi, this is Lindsay. I'm curious to learn more about the additional nutrient load reduction devices. If you can kind of describe them, explain in a little bit more detail, it'd be beneficial.
This could be a myriad of best management practices, many which are already in place. So things from low impact design techniques, rain gardens, bioswales, baffle boxes for stormwater controls, lots of different things that just help to uptake nutrients and provide stormwater polishing and treatment before those stormwater enters the natural water bodies. So just trying to get people to understand that's a whole suite of options for things to improve the quality of stormwater before it enters Tampa Bay.
Could you talk a little bit about the causeway alterations? What do you want us to think about?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand your question.
You're talking about potential management actions. What do you want us to focus in the causeway alterations? I don't know how that would be a potential management action.
Sure. Right now, I just want to make sure that everyone understands what each of these things are when I use these words. So a causeway alteration would be some sort of breach in a causeway, an opening in a causeway, an extension of a bridge so that water can flow freely through an area where it's currently impeded by an artificial landmass.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more question marks pop up. So now that we all kind of understand what we're talking about, I'm going to move on to the questions about these potential management actions. Okay, so the first question is to think about ranking all of these potential management actions to reduce pyridinium blooms in Old Tampa Bay from what you think might be the most effective to what you think might be the least effective. So you should be able to drag and drop these in order. So 1 is the action that you think would be most effective at reducing pyridinium blooms in Old Tampa Bay, and 6 would be the thing that has the least effect on reducing pyridinium blooms in Old Tampa Bay. This is just your gut feeling. The whole point of this project is to get to the research that will help to answer some of these questions so that we all are on the same page and we have data that supports data and evidence that supports future decision making.
That one needs like a horse race animation with the 1 and 2 are neck and neck.
Okay. So for this question, I would like you to think about how you would describe your organization's responsibility to directly implement the following potential management actions. So for example, if you were to think about like my neighbor's yard might influence something on my yard, but I can't really make decisions for my neighbor about what they do on their property. So I might have a stake in what they do, but I cannot directly influence what they do on their property. So we're trying to think about the extent to which your organization could reduce additional nutrient loads through things like stormwater BMPs, or implement a shellfish aquaculture restoration project. If your organization could be the one that's responsible and would have the authority to implement a causeway alteration project in Old Tampa Bay. So we're trying to figure out if our audience is matching up with the implementers of the management actions that we've identified here.
Chris, if I would argue if your organization supports through funding that you're an implementer.
Great, thank you.
Did anyone have any thoughts about this question or have anything that they wanted to offer?
Yeah, it looks like we need to have another meeting with people important enough to make decisions on this stuff.
Well, some of what we've talked about is how the participants in the estuary program have changed over time. At the beginning, when it was formed, elected officials or top agency officials participated, and over time they delegated those roles down deeper within the organization. What does that mean? And similarly here, we perhaps have assembled a team to address nutrient loads, which that makes sense being through the primary work of the estuary program and the nitrogen management consortium. But some of these new avenues that we're considering, we maybe haven't assembled the right team to do that kind of work yet. And so that's kind of what we're trying to tease apart and understand. All right. So this question is asking you to rate the utility of the following kinds of information for your organization's decision-making process. So as we're putting together a plan, a research and application plan, we want to make sure that the kinds of information that we're working, to develop collaboratively is something that will be useful for you all in how you make decisions. So do you think that the missing pieces of the puzzle here are things like additional research on pyridinium physiology to improve our growth models? Is it things like model output that quantifies the transport times of cells under various hydrologic scenarios? Is it model output that describes the predicted effects of shellfish grazing at various scales of restoration? Or might it be something like coupled biological and physical models of pyridinium growth and loss factors?
To Steve's comment in the chat, I would propose he frames it in this point of view in terms of what information would help you identify where you might have a cleanup event or a volunteer event to address some of these issues. Maybe framing it that way would be helpful in your ranking. I don't know if that helps or not. So Steve, if you had any other thoughts, feel free to chime in.
Or if you don't feel like this information would be useful, you know, given your specific organization's interests, like that's acceptable too. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question. So rate the importance of the following considerations when making decisions about whether or not to implement a particular management action. So what are the things that are most important to whether or not your organization pulls the trigger on implementing a project? Is it things like permit feasibility? Is it the cost of the project? Is it the certainty of the outcome? You know, how much do we need to know that this is going to have a positive impact? Is it the scale of the benefit achieved? Is it the immediacy of the results? So many of these are factors that we did include in the prior Old Tampa Bay integrated ecosystem model to evaluate some of the management alternatives that were there. And we're curious whether or not that information is helpful to evaluate, and if we need to continue keeping these sorts of considerations in the research products that we put out there for you all to consider. Okay, move on. In your opinion, what is a reasonable time frame for a given management action to improve water quality in Old Tampa Bay? Are you looking for something to have an impact in the order of 1 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, 11 to 20 years, more than 20 years, or are you unsure? I think about, you know, when folks were first setting up the seagrass restoration goals for Tampa Bay, how many of the folks that were sitting in the room didn't think that we would achieve those goals within the time horizon of their careers, and yet we were able to achieve some of those goals earlier than folks had initially thought. And so just kind of wondering how that thinking applies here to Old Tampa Bay and what we're trying to accomplish. reasonable for you, John, for you and your expectations. So probably more science than politics.
Yeah, Maya, that's a tough one because, you know, I think when we think about plans and like our swim plan or the CCMP or our A plans, you know, we're usually on a 5-10 year planning horizon, but I don't know if that's simply by default or if that's, you know, there's more thought given to that. I think, you know, I think you're right. Mortality plays a big part of that. So I don't think this question is quite as easy to answer as, you know, I mean, I would want it to be immediate, but I know that's not realistic. So it's kind of a thought-provoking question. I like it. I just don't know if there's an easy answer to it.
Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily easy answers to any of these. It's just sort of how we're approaching problems as a community and trying to understand where we're at as a collective. So
yeah, and Maya, you know, I think there's a really important message that you brought that you mentioned, which is that, you know, when you look at Tampa Bay over the last 30 to 40 years, the people that initiated the improvements in the Bay's water quality in the 1970s and the 80s with the passage of the Grizzle Fig legislation and everything else, you know, I don't think they were thinking time frame. I think they were thinking we have a problem and this is how we address it. But you're right, it took, you know, 20 plus years to get where we are today. So it's an interesting question, but, you know, at the same time, I don't think we should let it drive, you know, our decisions per se.
I would add that it could take 2 to 3 years just to get feasibility into the budget before you get to a 5-year construction budget.
yeah, spoken like someone who's implemented these kinds of projects before. So I think this is largely about managing, you know, collective expectations too, right?
We're just trying to figure out if we need to develop an app so we could give you guys instant gratification and feedback.
We're on pins and needles, Ed.
Yeah, to me, this isn't about what necessarily sounds best. It's what's acceptable, what's reasonable for you in your time frame. So, you know, you'd feel like we accomplished something if we were able to turn around water quality challenges in Old Tampa Bay when. All right, I'm going to move on unless there's other comments that people would like to offer. Okay. So this question is just whether or not you think it's possible to prevent pyridinium blooms in Old Tampa Bay, and whether or not you think it's possible to minimize the magnitude and duration of pyridinium blooms in Old Tampa Bay. So again, this is about managing expectations with each other and making sure that we think that the same things are possible and, you know, oriented our work towards things that align with those values. Tyler, anything is possible with enough funding, so just throw money at the problem. Okay. So the last couple of questions are more free-form, open-ended. So in this one, we want to know, what kind of knowledge do you need in order to champion projects that will either restore hydrology, improve circulation, or enhance the shellfish populations in Old Tampa Bay? You know, do you already know what you need to know? You just got to do it, or are there pieces that are missing, questions that you have that would really help you close that gap and start to advocate for the kinds of projects which we're imagining today. And after you've typed your answer and seen it come up on the screen, if you want to explain it a little bit more, feel free to chat while others are putting their answers in. Otherwise, I might read through and call and ask some more questions. Does anybody want to offer their thoughts? So one of these says that some of the knowledge that's needed is that there is support, not just at the local community level, but at all levels up to Tallahassee. Do you want to talk about that? Whoever wrote that answer in there?
Great, thank you, Maya. Just that, quite often you get involved in projects and you see what you need to do, but there's decisions being made on a political level that may conflict with what your desired outcomes may be, be it regional planning and zoning and trends and development, areas that you see that you think, that's a tremendous opportunity to restore some coastal environment, and it gets bought up by a developer. There's just plenty of history of some frustrating outcomes, and if we're going to make a difference, there needs to be multiple layers of commitment to it. This is a huge system. There's a lot of economic potential, not only in the past but into the future based on decisions we make today. And where is the value? Is it ecological integrity, or is it more concrete, more roofs?
So there's at least a few people who responded that we know the projects that we need, we just need funding. So there's some folks that have knowledge but just need the resources to support. But then there are others who have identified a variety of science kinds of research questions about shellfish extent, the historic extent of shellfish populations in Old Tampa Bay, coupled models. Is there anybody that wants to chat about their answer a little bit? This would be a great time to do that.
Maya, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Allison Roberts, and I'm going to go back to some of the comments that Ed made around the 3-to-1 ratio of land to open water in Old Tampa Bay, and also that 2/3 of those lands have urban or suburban development on them. As president of a association for a waterfront community, one of the most common questions that I get, not only from my community but the surrounding communities, is what can I do that will make a meaningful impact, and if we all work together, will actually impact the nutrient load in the waterways and and help Old Tampa Bay. And if we could develop a true community model that could be implemented, that had some scientific basis to it, that addressed things around living seawalls, local aeration, things that could be done in terms of stormwater management, particularly when resurfacing projects are done in the area, that kind of thing. I think there's more community support than anyone would ever imagine in terms of implementing such a model. But right now it's all kind of, you pick whatever you want because there's nothing that's, you can pick up and look at the whole community impact and how something like that could be coordinated and benefit the area. So that just, it's a thought I'd like to throw out there.
Yep, I appreciate that, Allison. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's good input, Allison. I think when we've approached this concept in the past, we looked at basically gross changes, like 25% reduction of non-point sources, but really identifying what that means in a dispersed community and environment of implementation is an important one, and how we rally that support at the community level. We need to give some intentional thought about that, and I think tailored research to address community buy-in and applications is important moving forward in a very urban environment. So thank you. That's great feedback.
You're welcome. We'd be happy to pilot or help you any way we can.
Hey, Maya, this is Tom.
Hey, Tom.
A couple of thoughts. I would caution, I know we focus on pyridinium and that's the bloom du jour, but I caution of making pyridinium the boogeyman of Old Tampa Bay. We could very easily find ourselves in a situation where we somehow manage to get pyridinium in check, but then another species, perhaps diatoms, take over, and we still have the same problem we had. It's just a different outcome. And I wrote that I thought we need a better, maybe perhaps more up-to-date understanding of our knowledge of the physical and biological processes going on up there, because I hearken back to the days of the dredge hole studies where we were all pretty well convinced that dredge holes were just deep, devoid of life, stratified, anoxic holes in the ground that just happened to be under Tampa Bay. And until we actually really focused on the science and what was going on in them, we didn't realize that that was not the case. And quite often it was just the opposite. They were very well oxygenated. They were supporting all kinds of recreationally important sport fish. And they weren't perhaps the evil thing we thought they were. I think we just need to maybe step back and reassess what we know in Old Tampa Bay and what we think we know in Old Tampa Bay.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tom. I think one of the next steps that we'll be producing is sort of a synthesis of the state of knowledge and the research that's been done to date. And I think that'll help us flesh out some of those questions that we don't know that'll move this thing along. So I think that's where we're headed. Okay, this is the last question. Some of you all put this in the box, the last one, for what you would need to know, but we're interested in what you see as a potential barrier to improving water quality in Old Tampa Bay. So just help point out the landmines for us. We've stumped you. So a lot of external factors like political will, money, overpopulation, development, and land use. Can someone who talked about TMDL regulations being too high, or I read that as stringent, someone like to talk about that a little bit as a barrier?
Hey Maya, yeah, that was me. This is Sarah Napier. I'm affiliated with Suncoast Sierra Club, and I just recently took the Florida Water Stewardship Program with UFIFIS, and it just seemed like in what we were learning about that was a continual kind of issue in terms of, you know, best management practices and trying to improve those plans. I can't really speak to it much. I'm just kind of learning in that regard, but it just seems to me that that might be an issue.
I'm also seeing several answers related to climate variables and confounding factors that might be additional challenging: precipitation, stormwater flow, temperature. I'll be a bad social scientist and offer that I don't think we've all agreed on defining the problem here. And so that I see that as a barrier too, something that we're going to need to work together as a community to make sure that we define the management need and the problem that we're working to address collectively. Are there any other barriers that folks have put up here that they'd like to chat about a little bit? Otherwise, we are about 5 minutes over our allotted time, but this was the last question. I think you all have given us a lot of useful feedback to consider and to summarize as we move forward with the next steps of this project.
Hey, Maya, it's Tom again. Not to take us into overtime, but have you guys considered, or maybe this is a better question for Ed, have you considered a joint meeting of the policy board and the management board, or even on a larger scale, a joint meeting of the scientific community and the permitting / political community? Because I think, you know, a lot of what we talk about as scientists, we really don't have the authority to implement. And we can't, you know, we can talk about it all day long, but we can't move the wheel. And the people who can move the wheel, as one of the previous questions showed us clearly, are just not in the room. And I think this is a problem we've had for quite some time, that we would like to see things done, but the people who can actually implement them aren't part of the conversation.
It's a really excellent point.
Yeah, as you probably could tell through going through the survey, there's many loaded questions to kind of tease out where we see potential barriers moving forward. And as Maya mentioned, you know, the management conference that we operated in the past is not the one we're operating now and into the future. So how that evolves is an important question for the program. And I think all the points you just made, Tom, in terms of having the right people in the room to discuss these issues and then work at solving them is an important one. And I think that's a lot of the social research components that we're hoping to tease out with this project as well.
And basis may be a good opportunity to do that. Whether you have to comp a bunch of people or what, but somehow drag them kicking and screaming to a basis conference and make them sit in a room full of scientists for 2 days.
This was originally supposed to be a workshop at basis, but yeah, I think that there are incentives that we can offer for elected officials or for regulators who might not naturally plan to come, but where we could make those linkages. I think that's a good idea.
I do want to give some credit. I mean, we've gotten some elected officials and staff at these meetings, at least today. So keeping that momentum moving forward is important.
We have an extra workroom available the entire week of basis, just kind of FYI. I think seats 50.
Tell them you're giving them an award. That always gets them in the room.
I mean, I've never attended basis, but it's the Science and Information Symposium, not just Science Symposium. So maybe that's a good incentive.
Well, if I can just add to what Tom said, I think that's a big part of it. I think he hit it right on the head. But in addition to inviting those policymakers, and I will add too, the private sector should be involved as well. There should be a two-way conversation. So I think it's equally important for us as the scientific community to understand where they're coming from as well. So it's more of a dialogue than just forcing them to sit in a room and say, here, this is what you need to do, now do it. Even though that may be what we believe, and maybe at the end of the day might be the right approach. There are socioeconomic forces here too that need to be part of the discussion. So I think it's great. I don't want to create estuary program envy, Ed, but there were a couple workshops that the Sarasota Bay Estuary program did, the ecology workshop and then the water quality workshop that they just completed about maybe a month ago. And I thought it was a very productive use of time because it included all levels of those folks that are involved in the process, not just the technical and not just the policy, and sort of created the dialogue, which I think is really important.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Chris. We don't have envy.
I know you don't. Some EDs who shall remain nameless might disagree with that, but I know you don't.
I think we approached our time, and I think we got through a lot of the survey input that we wanted to get from the community that's involved today. So we appreciate you guys' time. Carrie, you want to wrap up on next steps, or do you want me to do that?
I can say a little bit. I think, we'll take this feedback to sort of shape, to make sure we have specific components that were mentioned today incorporated into that research synthesis that we'll make available. And then I'll let you finish it off with the.
Yeah, so this isn't our first or last Old Tampa Bay Rodeo. So we will continue to engage with you on these topics. We're going to take your feedback, like Carrie mentioned, and mostly work on developing a research synthesis, but we will probably be holding another meeting shortly, either with the Old Tampa Bay Working Group and NMC, and we'd probably invite stakeholders who were represented today to participate in those meetings as well. So we will broadly advertise sort of the next opportunity for input along this process, but we definitely appreciate everyone's feedback, and you'll be hearing more from us. Anyone else from the team want to add anything?
Yeah, if you have a chance to sort of noodle on some of these questions and these subjects that we brought up today, feel free to shoot me or any of the team an email. If you have ideas about ways we should approach this moving forward for engagement or otherwise that we would be more effective, be happy to have the sort of offline one-on-one conversations with you as well.
So thank you all. We went 11 minutes over, but we tried to keep it a shorter meeting than normal. So thank you guys again.
Yeah, thanks
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Someone stop the recording.
Thank you.